everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about finding your immigrant ancestors, particularly those who came over in the early 20th century. On Thursday we'll talk about those who came over in the late 19th century, and then sometime next week or the week after we'll just keep moving back in time. A little bit different tips and tricks depending on when people immigrated. So we'll focus on maybe 30, 40 years at a time, so that if you know when your ancestors immigrated, you can get some tips very specific to the time period in which they came over to the United States specifically. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and dive in to today's topic. We've got quite a bit to cover, and I want to make sure we get through it all in the time that we have available. One of the first things I'm going to suggest that you do when you are looking for your immigrant ancestors is to start with the census. For those who came in the early 1900s, 1900 through about 1940, that's going to be your best bet. There's a couple of things you're going to be looking for specifically on that census. And those of you who are new to family history may not even realize that this information is included. You may have already found the census records and not recognize what you've got there. So let me just show you what you should be looking for, and then we'll look at a couple of census records specifically so you know where to find it. The first thing you're going to be looking for on those census records, 1900 to 1930, are you're looking for the immigration year. It should be listed. It's going to be in a little bit different place on the image depending on which census you're looking at. You also want to look for the naturalization status. That is listed usually as one of three things. It's going to be listed as AL if they're an alien, meaning they have not yet become a citizen of the United States. A PA, which means they've submitted papers to start that naturalization process, or an NA, which means they are a naturalized citizen. So that's the little clue you're going to be looking for, AL, PA, or NA for their naturalization status. Also, and this one isn't quite as intuitive, pay attention to the birthplaces of the children. That will give you some clues as to exactly when the family immigrated. If they immigrated separately, meaning the husband came over first, maybe with an older child or two, and then the wife came over later with the younger children, the birthplaces of those children are going to give you some good clues about maybe the migration pattern of that family, and also just corroborate that immigration year a little bit more closely. Now, once you've identified all those census records, and actually let's just look at some examples before we start talking about naturalization. So I'm going to be looking here at a Nathan Goldberg. Nathan Goldberg immigrated to the United States, and we know that much about him. This is the 1910 census, and so I'm going to let's see, he's right here at the top of the image. Let me see if I can magnify this, make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it here. Looks like I've got some image things on my browser that aren't working. So Nathan Goldberg here and his wife Rose, they've been married for about 5 months. Let me just stop that plug-in. It's causing some issues for me right now. I'll refresh that image. And that should, okay, there we go. So here is Nathan Goldberg at the top of this image, and if I just enlarge this a little bit so you can see it, you can see here that he immigrated in 1904, and in the 1910 census he lists PA as his naturalization status, which means he has submitted papers. And then his wife looks like she immigrated in 1905. Now they've only been married for about 5 months. You see that little 5/12 right there. And so that makes sense. She came probably with her family as a child. 5 years earlier, she would have been about 18 years old. So pay attention to those kinds of things. In the 1910 census, that naturalization and citizenship information is about, maybe 2/3 of the way over on the page here, just a little bit over halfway. It's going to be in this column right here. On the 1920 census, looks like that plugin created some problems for me to have to refresh every page. On the 1920 census, if I scroll, let's see, where's my Goldberg family? Here they are actually. So here's the Goldberg family. Let me zoom in on that. The naturalization and citizenship information is right here. It's just after the age and gender. So in this case, it says he immigrated to the United States in 1905. So there's a 1-year discrepancy there. 1910 census said he came in 1904. 1920 census said he came in 1905. So we know we've got a window of time we need to look at. Still, it says PA for his naturalization status. And then this column, there's a little bit of an error here made by the census taker. The question is, if naturalized, what year were you naturalized? Well, he is not yet naturalized, and yet they wrote 1915 as the year of his naturalization. And so there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the information. So is he really naturalized? And did it occur in 1915? Or did he submit papers again in 1915? Did he misunderstand the question? Sometimes you'll find discrepancies like that on the records themselves, and you have to kind of figure out what's the truth. You get closer to the truth, the more records you find. So now, if we go to the 1930 census, you refresh that image, we're going to see here, let me zoom in, magnify this section. Naturalization information is all the way back over here this particular year. He immigrated in 1905, and he is now listed NA as a naturalized citizen of the United States. In every case, his birthplace is listed as Russia, so we have some clues there about where he may have come from. But this naturalization information is going to be more important. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but every one of these censuses, he's listed in Philadelphia. He was living in Philadelphia in 1910, 1920, 1930. And so the natural assumption in this case would be, well, he must have immigrated through Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a port city. And this is where the naturalization paperwork becomes really important. First of all, he's listed as Nathan Goldberg on every census except 1910. On the 1910 census, he's listed as Noyan, N-O-Y-A-N, Noyan Goldberg. And so there could be some name change issues going on here. His immigration year is listed fairly consistently, 1904 on one census, 1905 on the two successive censuses. So we have a fairly narrow window. So you could just jump in and start searching passenger lists into Philadelphia in 1904 or 1905 for a Nathan Goldberg. The problem is that there could be several, and how do you know which one is your person? So one of the things that I recommend is once you have done that census work, once you've kind of narrowed down their immigration information and their naturalization status based on those census records, if they were naturalized, look for those papers next before you go looking for a passenger list. Naturalization paperwork, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the richest documents that exist outside of maybe pension files. Naturalization paperwork requires a lot of detail provided about birth date and place, about immigration date and place, about spouse's birth date and children's birth dates and places. So those records are going to become really, really critical. Make sure that you get, when you go looking for that naturalization packet, that you get the complete packet of information, not just the certificate. When a person became a naturalized citizen of the United States, they received a certificate of naturalization. And that certificate is oftentimes what gets passed down in family papers. And so you may have a copy of your ancestor's certificate. But that is not what we're looking for. What we're looking for are two things. First of all, it's the Declaration of Intent, which is part of those papers, that first set of papers that the immigrants were required to file, and then the petition for naturalization, or the second set of papers that they were required to file. Both of those had to be filed before a certificate of naturalization was granted. So a declaration of intent to become a citizen, and then a petition for naturalization. And all of those make up this complete naturalization packet of information. On that, once you get that, and we'll look at an example here, you're going to be looking specifically for some dates, ports, and ships of arrival. Rather than just having a general year, very often on the naturalization paperwork, particularly in the early 1900s, it will list the exact date and the port that they left from and arrived in, and very often even the name of the ship. So even if they got the date wrong, and sometimes dates are a little harder to remember, most often the name of the ship is accurate because they remember the name of the ship that they came on or the port that they came into, sometimes a little more clearly than they remember the exact date that they arrived. Also pay attention to information about spouse and children in that naturalization paperwork. Before 1920, when there were some changes to the law, underage children and wives were granted citizenship status based on the status of their husband or father. So if the children were underage and if the man was married, that wife and children were automatically granted citizenship when their husband or father became a citizen. So there's not going to be separate paperwork for them. It's all going to be included. But what that means is that on the husband's paperwork, oftentimes details about the spouse, her birth date and place, and the children and their birth date and place are going to be listed. So let's go back to our Nathan Goldberg. Nathan Goldberg, we were able to find his naturalization paperwork. Here is his petition for naturalization. And actually, let me go back an image here, because before that, we even have his declaration of intent. So on his declaration of intent, he is listed as Noan, N-O-A-N, Goldberg. He's also listed an alternate name here of Neuch, N-E-U-C-H, Goldberg. And of course, we know from the census that he goes by the name of, once he came into the United States, Nathan Goldberg. There's a couple of reasons why we know this is the right guy, and I'll show that to you here in just a second. But there's a lot of really great information here. First of all, there's a description of him, his occupation, his age, his physical description. Most exciting for those of us who are looking for immigrant ancestors, it lists where he was born. In this case, it says Swinsk, Russia. Now, funny thing is, I looked that up and there is no such place. But we'll see. Again, the more information you have, the more likely you are to get close to the truth. It also lists his birth date, the 10th of April, 1885. Here is the address he now resides at in Philadelphia. And that is one of the pieces of information that led me to believe that I had the right person. This is the exact same address that he's living at in the 1920 census. So I'm fairly certain, actually pretty much 100% certain, that this is the same person. Now, he lists here that he emigrated to the United States. Let me zoom in here. From Bremen, Germany, on the vessel Brandenburg. So the name of the ship was Brandenburg. He last lived in Svinsk, Russia. That could be different, so pay attention to these two things. Sometimes where they are born and where they last lived are not the same place. And if they moved, that's why sometimes on the census you may see, one time it may say they were born in Russia, and one time it may say they were born in Germany, and one time it may say they were born in Poland, and sometimes it's because the borders actually changed. But more often than not, it's how the census taker asked the question. If I was asked, where were you born, I would answer that question one way. If somebody said, where are you from, I would answer that question a different way. And so depending on how the census taker asked the question, even though technically it was supposed to be where were you born, they may have provided different answers. So pay attention to both where they were born and where their last foreign residence was. Now in this case, our buddy here, he lists his wife's name as Rosa, and she was born at Gubat, and that's all it says. It doesn't list a country, so I would make sure I recorded that information so that I could go searching for that location. He then says that he arrived at the port of Baltimore, Maryland. So even though he went straight to Philadelphia, even though he always lived in Philadelphia after he came to the United States, he did not arrive through the port of Philadelphia, which is something that most people would just assume because he was living in Philadelphia. Very similar if your family came to New York or Boston. Just because they lived there, just because they always lived there after they came to the United States, does not necessarily mean that's the port that they arrived through. So this naturalization paperwork will provide you with more details specifically about the port that they arrived at. And then in this case, and I love the wording of this, on or about the 10th day of August, 1904. So this is what is called the Declaration of Intent. In this case, he filed it on the 28th of January in 1924. If I zoom out a little bit here, you can see this is kind of just what the form looks like, Declaration of Intent. Now, when you get to this record, make sure you always click to the next couple of images, because remember, this is a packet of information. The index will take you to this first set, this first page, but always check the next image. So this next image, in this case, is his petition for naturalization. Same guy, just more information is going to be included here. So let me zoom in some more here. Now we see his name is listed as Noah. The address, however, is the same. The birth date is the same. The occupation is the same. So I know it's the same guy. So his first name has changed slightly from the census to the Declaration of Intent to the Petition of Naturalization. That's not uncommon, particularly with Eastern European immigrants, but even with some Western European immigrants. When they got to the United States, they wanted to Americanize their names a little bit, and sometimes they tried out a name or two before they settled on one. And that name change was not always a formal thing. So in this case, it looks like he just changed his name slightly from one document to the next, until he became known as Nathan, which is the name that his death is recorded under, actually. So he lists again here that he was born on the 10th of April, 1885. This time it says Dvinsk, D with a D instead of an S, and that actually is a place. So it was just recorded incorrectly on his first record. He immigrated to the United States from Bremen, Germany. So that's the port he left from, and that's good information. There are, on occasion, particularly in the instances of Bremen and Hamburg and the United Kingdom, there are also outbound passenger lists, not just inbound passenger lists like we have here in the U.S. into New York or into Philadelphia or into Baltimore. They actually have the passenger lists as they were created when they left the port. So sometimes that's useful information. He left Bremen on or about the 20th of July, 1904, arrived in the port of Baltimore on the 4th of August, 1904 on the vessel Brandenburg. So that information is being consistently reported. He lists his wife's name here again. This time we have her birth date, the 1st of February, 1886, that she was born in Russia. So on the previous page, if you remember, it just listed a town name with no country. Now we have a country name with no town. But it helps us get closer to the truth, the more documents we have. Then it lists the names of each of their children, Louis, Anna, William, and Simon, their birth dates and their birth locations, all of them being born in Philadelphia, and the fact that each of them at the time that he filled this paperwork out were residing with him. Again, that's important because if you remember, underage children derive their citizenship status from their parents. Now in this case, all of his children were born in Philadelphia, so those dates are recorded just to show that his children are actually U.S. citizens. Now, you could continue to read through this information. There is some good stuff here. For example, if I scroll down to the bottom, I see a signature from him. That's actually his signature of his name. Scroll down a little bit further here. I have affidavits from witnesses, people who have known him since he came to the United States or for a certain period of time prior to his filing his petition, so that they can attest that he is who he says he is, that he has been in the United States the requisite amount of time. And in this case, there's a David Goldberg. Always pay attention to who those witnesses are. You never know when you might find another family member or somebody else to investigate. And just because the last name is different, don't discount that. If you don't know the maiden name of the wife, if you don't know if the man had sisters who might have been married to men with other last names, pay attention to who those witnesses are. Typically, they're going to be family or close associates. In this case, this gentleman has the same occupation that our Noah Goldberg has, and so maybe he is a work colleague or a business partner. So pay attention to who those witnesses are. That's the detailed kind of information you're going to find in that naturalization paperwork. Now let me show you where to find that so that you know maybe how to get to it. If you go to search and use the card catalog, it's the very bottom option there under search. Over here in these filters, we have an immigration category. So I can click on immigration. Then I can click on Citizenship and Naturalization Records to narrow that list down. Click then on location, U.S. In this case, our gentleman lived in Pennsylvania, and typically if they lived in the same place for an extended period of time, that's where you're going to find their naturalization documents. So now I've narrowed it down here to 27 databases that contain naturalization records of some sort for the state of Pennsylvania. Some of these are indexes only, which just means that Ancestry.com has received the index cards from the National Archives. We've indexed those indexes, but that'll provide you with the petition number so that you can order the original set of documents from the National Archives. We have a couple of databases of those. You'll see here this one has 5.8 million records. This one has 2.4 million records. Let me make that a little bigger for you. So those are just indexes, which means when you find the card, you'll need to order the original. We do have about just over 2 million actual original sets of documents from the National Archives. In this case, we have 2 databases here that fall under that category. One with about 1.5 million, one with about 3/4 million records. And then we do have a few states, in this case Pennsylvania being one of them, where we've received documents for that specific location. So in this case, I just went here and to this Pennsylvania Naturalization Originals, typed in Noah Goldberg, and was able to find his record. That's how you use or find the naturalization original certificates. Now, with that said, once we've done all this, we've done the census work, we've found the naturalization paperwork, we now know he immigrated to the United States through the port of Baltimore in August of 1904 on the ship Brandenburg. Now I can go look for that passenger list. So in this case, we actually have a database. Let me just pull that up for you really quickly. Again, the easiest way to find what you're looking for is if you just go to the card catalog. I'm going to click on over here, Immigration and Travel. I'm going to click on Passenger Lists. I could further narrow it here by U.S. And in this case, I know he immigrated through Maryland. And now here I've got my short list of records that contain immigration passenger lists for people that are affiliated somehow with Maryland, whether they were from Maryland or the records themselves are from Maryland. I can click on this Baltimore passenger list and search here directly. I'm looking for a Goldberg who was born in about 1885, who immigrated to the United States in 1904 exactly. I could even come down here and put the name of the ship, Brandenburg. I hope I spelled that correctly. And do a search. I didn't spell it correctly. And I did it before so that I could show you. Here is the record for Noah Goldberg. And let me zoom in here and scroll down on this page. So here he is. He's listed as Noah, N-O-A-C-H, Noah Goldberg. It could be an S-H, which is how it was transcribed or indexed. He's 26 years old. He's listed as single. He's a painter. There is also a Rachel Goldberg traveling with him. She is also single. She's 24 years old. So just because there's a man and a woman about the right age, pay attention to that marital status, does not necessarily mean that they are husband and wife. In this case, someone has gone back in and written sister here. My guess is that was done when either Noah or Rachel's husband applied for naturalization, and they went back to check the passenger list to verify his immigration information, and then somebody has written in that she is his sister, which is excellent for us as researchers. Now, right over here, we have a column. This column actually is what was your last foreign residence, and in this case they list Dvinsk, both of them. Again, that verifies the information we had on the naturalization paperwork. They listed that they're headed for Philadelphia to their brother. So now we know that they already have a brother here in the United States. They have $3 on them when they come into the country. And then over here in this column, it lists who are you coming to in the United States. And here it says their brother, David Goldberg, and it lists his address in Philadelphia. So in 1904, when Noah came to the United States, his brother David was already here. And then if you remember, David was one of the witnesses on Noah's naturalization paperwork. Now, in this case, this is all the information that's provided. On some passenger lists in the early 1900s, the forms are a little bit different, and sometimes the questions are a little bit different. So pay attention to what these categories up here say. So for example, this is a passenger list out of New York in 1907. So not too many years, just 3 years after the Goldbergs immigrated, but it's a different port, and so sometimes their forms are just a little bit different. In this case, it lists the name of the people, their age and gender and occupation, whether or not they can read or write. It lists their nationality, the country of allegiance, and then their race. It also lists, much like the previous one we just looked at, their last permanent residence, the country and the town name. If you remember on Noah's passenger list, it just listed Dvinsk. If we hadn't known that that was in Russia, that might have been a little frustrating because all it listed was the town. On this one, we get the town and the country. Now, this field on these records is really exciting because the question here is the name and complete address of your nearest relative or friend in the country from whence you came. So oftentimes what you'll see here is names of parents. Here's a father, a wife, a brother, a mother, and the town that they're living in. So you see who they left behind. And that becomes really important information. It also lists, much like the other one, the final destination. Now here's where things get tricky, and I just want to make sure you pay attention. On these particular passenger lists, there happens to be a second page. So make sure that you always check the next page. So for example, if I was interested in, let's see here, this Rosa Reicher, she's on line 7. I'm going to click to the next image, and it is just a continuation of the first page there. I'm going to go to line 7, and this information is all about her as well. So in this case, the second page lists who paid for her passage, if she'd ever been to the United States before, and then here is the information about who she's coming to in the United States. So in this case, the first page lists who they left behind, and the information about who they're coming to is on the second page. In this case, it's her brother, and it lists his address in New York. It lists information about their health and their physical description, including height and hair color and eye color. And then way over here, it lists their birth country and town. So remember, just because they were from a place doesn't mean that's where they were born. And both pieces of that information are listed on some of these passenger lists. So make sure you get both pieces of information. Hopefully you see now that it's a little bit easier once you've located that naturalization paperwork and done that census work to actually find the passenger list and to know that you have the right person. As unique as you may think your family name is or the name of the ancestor that you're looking for, even if you find 2 or 3 of them, it can be really frustrating to not know which one is your person. And all of these pieces of information work in concert to help you narrow in on the person that is your ancestor. Make sure that you have the right information so that you can start off on a whole new genealogy adventure, which is looking for records in the old country. Now, just one final word of warning before I sign off. Before you just dive into looking for records in the old country, I would strongly recommend that you do a little research into that location. I'll just show you what I did for this particular Nathan Goldberg. I just Googled Dvinsk, Russia. Come to find out that sometimes it's spelled with a W, but the actual spelling is D-V-I-N-S-K. And then there were a bunch of links that came up. And so I just started looking at these links. Dvinsk was actually only called Dvinsk between 1893 and 1920. So it wasn't even called that when Noah was born there. But by the time he was reporting it on a passenger list, on his naturalization paperwork, that was the name of it. It's actually not in Russia at all. It was in Russia at one point. It was also part of Poland at one point, but today it's part of Latvia. And so we can see here on a map exactly where it is. You can see the different languages that have been used, the different countries and borders that it's had over time. So you can just learn a little bit about it. It also, in this case, it was a Jewish family. And so I found a whole page of Jewish families of Dvinsk with some additional information about records and what can be found there. I was able to find information about the government, and that's important because you want to know how records are kept. And most records we use in genealogy are government-based records. In this case, most of what I discovered tells me that the records for that location are going to be held in the State Historical Archives of Latvia. So I just Googled State Archives of Latvia and it brought me to their website, and lucky enough they actually have an English version of their website, so I don't even have to run it through Google Translate. I can just look here, find their catalog, see what their services are, see what records they hold, what other information might be of use to me were I to, here's even a genealogical research link I could click on and learn more. So I can find out what other resources might be available to me to research more about my family in that particular location, what records they hold if I want to go do the research myself, or if I want to have someone do that research for me. So to just do a little bit of research into the location, you'll save yourself a whole lot of time and energy rather than just trying to look for records in Russia, right? So that's all we have time for today. I hope this was useful for you. I wish you all the best in locating your own immigrant ancestors from the early 1900s. Hopefully using some of these tips and tricks will help you locate them a little bit quicker and a little bit more accurately. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.